Right, so this is our update after our wildfire season. This is season 4 of the podcast. Whoops.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
I feel so bad for the guy who edits this poor thing.
Did you know that God planted a really cool grove with Noah's flood?
I'm supposed to be honest because I do know the story. We've talked about it multiple times. It's a beautiful story you should share.
He planted this beautiful grove, right, thousands of years ago, older than all of the wonders of the world. And there are these trees growing. I've seen them. They're gorgeous. You stand at the base of them and you look up and you can't see the top. It's magical. There's one ingredient that made those groves possible, the redwood forest. And that ingredient is actually wildfires. Something that, intuitively we would think would be destructive. Something we would really want to avoid happening in a beautiful garden. These forests would not exist without those fires because other species would grow and crowd them out. So scientists actually have had to come in and encourage firefighters to figure out how to, while protecting property and everything, allow or plan fires to go through these forests in order to protect them from going extinct, because that's what would happen without fire in those forests. And that picture has really gotten me through these past few months, of our lives. Our last episode was how planning is the most underrated form of self-care, right? We had recorded part 2 of that self-care episode, but we were not able to upload it when some things happened in our lives that caused us to take a big step back from business, from pretty much everything besides just being present with our families.
Yeah, I mean, not really just a step back. It was like a screeching halt.
More than ever, the world needs kingdom-oriented women who have their priorities straight.
But in the day-to-day, managing all the roles and responsibilities God has entrusted to us can feel overwhelming. It's easy to think there simply isn't enough time for everything we need to do.
This podcast tackles that challenge head on because we know that God has promised to give us everything we need for life and godliness, and that includes enough time. I'm Shelby.
And I'm McCauley. We designed our planning method to support the growing movement of Christians taking radical personal responsibility over every area of their lives.
The Evergreen Planning Method takes the prep work you need to do to achieve your most life-giving goals and streamlines it into a simple 15-minute planning session each day.
We're here to teach you that method. So grab a cup of coffee and let's talk.
Basically, all aspects of planning and using the Evergreen Planning Method and even being here at the business just melted away, and we had to embrace total surrender before the Lord in every aspect of our lives. And we knew, obviously, our family comes first, and there where any of our energy goes to will be pouring into them. But otherwise, it was for me, a very long season of just, being completely surrendered before the Lord and not being able to build at all in that season. It was complete, walking hand in hand with the Lord through this season and trying to figure out exactly what it was that He wanted us to focus on, and He was our center, and trying to see what it was that He was doing with our lives individually. Really, it wasn't 100% the same thing. We were both walking different paths, and we had to kind of lay everything on the altar and figure out what we were going to do from there.
It was really providential that we both went through a wildfire at the same time.
Yeah.
Lord knows what He's doing at all times in our lives. And so as we were walking those different paths, one thing that we did have in common, like she said, was we weren't setting goals. We weren't nailing our rhythms. We weren't using our planner every day to get all these things accomplished that we had been in a really good rhythm to be able to do for years. And the Lord just had us, like you said, stepping back and just watching to see what He would do. And of course, just as you would think as you watch a redwood forest burn, all is lost. But in reality, God had grown so many things in our lives, so much stronger than even the wildfires. And it was a really beautiful picture of the refining fire, where all the dross is purged, and what stands and what remains is what is strong that God had put there. So, when you're going through it, it feels like nothing's going to be left. But then at the end, and looking back, it's pretty amazing because everything is so much better.
So the verse that we wanted to kind of bring some inspiration from in this particular episode is Romans 8:28. It says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose." Throughout this episode, we're going to be kind of explaining a lot of the transitional period between the wildfire and kind of reviving and our new perspective on wildfire seasons, and just kind of bridging that gap a little bit. But there's so much hope that we have experienced through this season, and just the mercies of God and the beauty of these seasons, regardless of how hard they might be. And I just wanted to mention this verse at the beginning so that we keep it in our mind throughout this episode.
One of the biggest misconceptions about time management and planning comes from just our culture's way of approaching things like time management. When you dive into the time management scene, you can all of a sudden feel this pressure, or like it's even possible to be able to jump in and say, okay, I'm going to now control everything, every area of my life. Nothing's going bad anymore. I'm going to come up with a plan. I'm going to set my goals, my rhythms. I'm going to plan my day, and I'm going to get organized in order to prevent bad things from happening, prevent hard things from happening, prevent crisis from happening, right? And there can be this idea that that is our responsibility to do that, or that it's even attainable to be able to do that. And then when things go wrong, it's very easy in the time management space to then, because we're all about taking radical personal responsibility, right? Well, it's easy to put yourself in a place that God has never put you, which is at the center of the story, the primary agent of your life, the one who is orchestrating everything, and you're using your planner to do that. And that is not what we're called to do. The Evergreen Planner, or whatever planning tool you use, is not there for you to be able to orchestrate and script this perfect life that has no troubles, no wildfire seasons. That's not the purpose of it. No matter how proficient you become at time management, productivity, goal setting, the Lord's purposes are not our own. His plans are not our own, right? We could not say, this is the mind of God, what we know he's going to be doing in our future, and now we're going to script it out with our goal setting and all of that, and we are going to prevent everything difficult from happening by just making all the right moves in our planning. That's not what we're called to do. It's not what we can do. When we are planning, it is so that we are taking the resources God has given us, especially time that he has given us, and we are approaching it with the recognition that God has given us things that we can steward. He has given us agency, but he's not put us in the place of God.
I find it really interesting in my story specifically because, I don't know, that nuance between personal responsibility and God's sovereignty has always leaned a little heavily on personal responsibility in my life, right? In my heart, and how I was trying to orchestrate things. And the point you made earlier about planning well enough to avoid crises or wildfires, that was definitely a tendency that I had. I wanted to bulletproof my life and my family's life and create such strong approach to it that
like a framework for your life, a scaffolding for your life.
Yeah, something that I could just control so well. And of course, the Lord's providential, and he would create crisis seasons maybe externally from my own little bubble that we'd have to walk through. But the idea that his sovereignty actually bleeds inside of that, comes inside of that bubble, was something that he was showing me through this last 6 months heavily. And that's why I keep going back to the whole total dependence on him and that idea. But just this reality that wildfire seasons are essentially good. He says all things will work together for good for those who love him and are called, is something that I think, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about here. We so often want to protect strongly against it and use all of our efforts to keep it from happening. In the culture of time management, it's so easy to create, like you're saying, a perfect recipe, a perfect framework that protects us and keeps us on track, on course with whatever our goals are. But this idea of actually embracing these seasons of wildfire, I don't know, is something just beautiful and new to me, because they are hard and they aren't comfortable, and you are scared at points, and you have to completely rely on the Father and His goodness through them. But here at Evergreen Planner, we've always talked about having the different seasons of productivity. You have thriving and reviving and surviving, and we've talked about crisis season, but kind of as a sidestep that happens, but we're not focusing there. But I think that the Lord has brought to our attention very, very fully how real that season is in everybody's life, and everybody experiences in some way or another, and the decisions that they make during those seasons are very, very important. Their ability or their resolve even to rely on the Lord and to surrender to the Lord in those seasons is so important. And a lot of times here at Evergreen, we offer practical solutions to problems in ways that you can tangibly organize things in your time. But this one was more particular. It was more spiritual and emotional in the ways of how we, in our heart posture, presented ourselves before the Lord through that time and walked that season.
I would say that if you were to say there is a time management principle that was brought in that season, it would be priorities. What are your priorities? And in that season, the priorities were to stop, take your hands off, and listen, and just watch what the Lord is doing. And earlier in this episode, I mentioned, we're not the primary agent. God is. We have agency. He gives us agency. He calls us to radical personal responsibility. We're not supposed to just be looking out at the world and saying all these things need to change, but then missing the parts that we can change, right? We are supposed to step up and take the fact that God has made us in His image and has called us to bring order out of chaos, just like He does, and to do the work that He has called us to do. We need to take these things seriously. But in the midst of that, we need to remember where we are in the big picture. And that is when we're sitting alone with our planners, even then we need to recognize I'm not the gardener. God is the gardener. Like, just right now, walk into the redwood forest in your mind. Can someone garden that forest? It is massive. You know how when you look up at the stars and you go, I'm so small, right? And the same effect happens when you go into the redwood forest and you go, wow, everything is so much bigger than me. And everything in my life is so much smaller than this moment that I'm in. And you just look around and you go, these have been here for thousands of years. And my life, I've been here for, when I had gone, I had been here for like 25 or something. You have those sacred moments when you remember who is truly in control, right, and how fleeting our lives are. In the book of James, he calls our attention to that. It's one of the most direct passages in scripture to the concepts of time management. He says, don't say, tomorrow I'm going to such and such town, I'm going to buy and sell and make a profit, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And he is not saying it's sinful to plan, because the rest of scripture, we bring everything in context with the full counsel of God, and the scripture elsewhere talks about how wise it is, especially in the Proverbs, to plan your way, and the Psalm says to teach us to number our days so that we'll apply our hearts unto wisdom. Planning is good, very good. What James's point is that we've got to remember the context, right? We always talk about planning our day in context for the rest of our life. We need to plan our life in context of the bigger picture of what God is doing and the rest of His history and what He is doing. So even that's what we must do for our wildfire seasons to make sense. They seem overwhelming and destructive, and like there will never be light again because there's just smoke everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. That's what they seem like in the moment. But when you are able to step back and see it in context of what God is doing, the thousands of years that this grove has been growing, then you can see this is part of a bigger picture. The Lord, as the gardener, knows what's best for this plot of land. Same thing for our lives, right? The Lord, as the gardener of our lives, knows what's best for our lives. And so we can then put those wildfire seasons in context and we can have hope. And I did say, tomorrow we're going to upload that podcast episode, part 2 of the self-care, and continue on with what we were doing, because we had all these plans for Q4 of last year. Tomorrow, this is what we're going to do. And that was good. We should have been planning Q4 of our business, but it was all with a Lord willing posture. It was with a Lord willing posture. And the Lord willed something different for the end of last year. He willed a very thorough cleansing and purging of our lives, both of us, in different ways. And he knew exactly what we needed, things we could not have set rooted goals for, right? The Evergreen Planning Method is rooted in the concept of everything being developed by Providence. As soon as we see ourselves as the masters of our own destiny, we have lost the game. We have lost the point of what we are doing when we are using our planner, when we are, making our goals, when we are setting up our rhythms and creating good habits. As soon as we see ourselves as master of our own destiny, we have moved into territory that God has never told us to move into. The scripture roundly counters any attempts at placing ourselves as the masters of our own destiny. So that's not the purpose of the Evergreen Planning Method. Right. Our purpose is to say, yes, Lord, I see all of the resources that you've put out before me. I accept whatever season you have me in. And for us, it's a reviving season
at this moment. Yeah, and I just do want to mention specifically, because I love actually the passion that you have talking about this and the hope that you have, and recognizing too what happened, like what was going on then. But to be completely honest, as of 3 months ago, we were not feeling this way, right? We weren't saying, okay, Lord, you are the master of the sea. We were trying to, and we kept coming back to our knees and attempting that. We are very human still, because I want to make sure when you guys hear this, you don't think that we were just completely on top of this wildfire season and we're able to just smoothly sail through it, because a lot of the proponents of the seasons for us didn't have to do specifically with us, but a lot of things kind of outside, completely out of our control. So it was less that we knew what our role was in those moments, or the exact outcome, or even that God's working. Of course, as his children, he gave us peace that he was working, right? We knew we had that hope, and even though some days it would feel very faint, or you could barely see that light, you knew there was that hope because he's such a kind father. But that passion that she has and how she was explaining that's come from living it and seeing his faithfulness at the other end of some of these things. And I just wanted to kind of mention that, so that if one of you guys are walking through this wildfire season, you don't project on your own self and wonder why you're not having the faith or the seeing God's hand in it so clearly, as Shelby was able to attest to just now. Because we are on the other side to a large extent.
There are a lot of Psalms, very difficult Psalms, that really encapsulate the kind of prayers that we were praying during that season of what is happening right now. You do not see how this is going to bring you glory, but at the very, very end of the Psalm, it's like, but you know how it will. Those Psalms, the harder Psalms, the lamenting Psalm, were definitely ones that we leaned on heavily. But knowing that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose, that theme did continue. Those promises did continue to carry us through to what was on the other side, which we are now. That's why it's so important that we have the word hidden in our hearts and recognize that any of our strategies and the Evergreen Planning Method, all that stuff, all of these strategies and things are good and they're temporary. But God, in his promises, that's what's eternal. That's what we can grab onto. That's the anchor of hope for our souls. Trusting that is the only way that we're going to be able to move forward in hope as we take stock of the seasons that we are in, and then sit down and say, okay, I have responsibility here. Now let me put pen to paper and figure out, what does today need to look like? What does this week need to look like? How do we reconstruct our homeschooling rhythms, or whatever it is that we're responsible to be doing, in order to be able to do that with hope, we must cling to God's promises.
Before, the wildfire season, I had such a solid habit towards opening up my planner and reflecting on my day and reflecting on my devotional and things along those lines. And so I was actually knee deep in the Psalms. I mean, that book is just such a gift from the Lord to carry us through these kinds of things. And so much of my first planner booklet, I think it was January of this year, was filled with notes and promises from the Psalms and laments and questions and all the different things that is inside of that book. I would just kind of process inside of my planner, because that's what I was starting to lean into, trying to pick up the pieces and see what all was this left. Like we had talked about, what is the sturdy stuff that survived, and what is it that needed to go, and the dross that needed to be cleared away. And
using your planner is like helping you get future oriented again and saying, okay, this is what the Lord has for me to do moving into the future.
And in the beginning of this revival season, that part wasn't as easy as it has been in the past, right? This idea of the hope and building and moving forward and looking to the next day, the next week, the next month. It's like, because of the experiences that we've had and the way that the Lord was strengthening me and maturing me in faith, I actually had a little bit more fear towards planning the next month. But I thought that was a beautiful testament to the Lord strengthening my faith, because I knew what I needed to do, and that was because it's the tool that the Lord has given us. I'm not saying that this has to be part of everybody's revival season, but the Lord has given us the Evergreen Planning Method and Planner. So it was the tool that I was using to rebuild with. And I had a lot of fear and a lot of leaning on the Lord and trust and doing it anyways, doing it even though it was scary, writing down a plan even though it might not even happen, a goal or whatever the things are. And then the reflection that you're able to do with the system, particularly we encourage writing down what did happen, helped me process through why some of these things weren't being able to fall back into place. Why, and maybe they weren't as important as it seemed like they were previously. And then my actual perspective on what was important shifted so much more time in certain areas that I had let slip, thinking, this is just a season. It's going to be like this for a while and then we'll change it. And then the Lord instead graciously was like, no, this has to change now. And so building in those new priorities as I've been using the Evergreen Planning Method. And we talked a little bit before this about, it's funny because it's like we're using it almost like a newbie to the system. As we have it completely memorized because we
wrote it.
There's so much newness to it and to how we're developing our rhythms and how we're prioritizing whatever goals fall. Or
we're having to go over everything in our lives with a fine-tooth comb again, logistically and everything else, and say, okay, this is how we've been running our day. Does something need to change? This is what our week rhythm usually looks like. Does something need to change? And I'd say my week rhythms have changed massively since the wildfire season.
For sure. Same. And just the amount of time with the different people in the family unit and all kinds of different things have just been shook up a bit, and you have to figure out what exactly those priorities need to look like to support everybody, because that is one of our primary roles as the women of the house, to try to figure out how to support all of the different humans inside of our home. And it's been a very beautiful process, I think. Yeah,
well, I mean, when you said that about supporting all the different people in our homes, it just gave me the picture of how while we are not the gardeners, like capital G gardener, like that is God, he has made us his under gardeners. And our homes in so many ways are like a garden. And he may say, okay, a wildfire, like would never have said, let's set this on fire. Like that would not be in our plan of what would be best. But that's what the Lord what he did, in this past season. And then he says, okay, look what remains. I knew exactly what I was doing. And then we take stock of what remains and looking at the different souls and different weeds that may have still be there, but maybe they're not as strong because that wildfire had really did a number clearing out so many weeds, and then we see this and we're like, okay, now I can see that and I can work on that one. And each person in our home had gone through the wildfire too, right? And so then we come and we take stock of them and their little hearts if they're a child, or our husbands and our marriages. The Lord always knows what is absolutely best. He's on the other side of the wildfire too, continuing on as the Master Gardener, right? He's continuing to do the work of gardening, but he first takes care of our hearts, and then he says, now you take care of hearts too, right? He doesn't just want us to sit back and say, fix it all. Yes, we're supposed to ask him, please, Lord, you redeem all of this because I cannot. I have nothing to give that you don't give to me. But he says, I want you to be open to receive what I'm going to give you so that I can work through you. He doesn't want us to sit back and not be willing to do whatever it is that he calls us to do, to stand up and to work. And we see that all throughout the scripture too. He didn't just say, Adam, Eve, y'all enjoy paradise. I'm going to keep making the rest of the world a garden and y'all just get to eat the fruit and it's going to be great and y'all kick back and enjoy. He says, take dominion, jump in, giving you this garden. Now go and extend this garden throughout this wilderness of the rest of the earth. And do that. And that was the big picture, right? When sin comes in, now we have all of the devastation that comes along with people saying, no thanks, Lord, we've got this by ourselves. We'd really rather not have your ways cramping our ways. We'd rather be the master gardeners here. And that sin comes in and creates all the weeds and all of its problems and everything. And that's where God comes in with the wildfires. Jesus says that the winnowing fan is in his hand. Hebrews says that he is a consuming fire. He takes down everything that is not of him, everything that is not good for his people, for his creatures, that is not good for his kingdom. He takes it out. And then what he grows in its place is so much better. And then he says, come, tend to what I'm growing and enjoy it. What grace, what grace. And that's where we are on the other side of this wildfire season. And I also wanted to mention something. We are familiar with wildfire seasons. And this is not our first wildfire season that we've ever had in our lives in any way. We have experienced cycles of wildfires in our lives. We just don't tend to talk about them on this platform, how the wildfire seasons can impact our logistics, but they have impacted us with chronic health issues. They've impacted us with just so many different things logistically that behind the scenes, we are also arranging around. And I wanted to bring that up because the Evergreen Planning Method was not born in absence of wildfires. It was actually because of wildfires in our lives that I was like, I've got to not just talk about how can I prioritize better with my friends and then go and try to apply it. I'm going to have to sit down with pen and paper and I'm going to have to get really strategic about how to rework everything about my life because these wildfires that had gone through had left me with a lot that was not in order. So the Evergreen Planning Method was my way of reordering my life. And then the rooted goals came in for, say, long term, how do we keep this order healthy? And then how do we build on it and continue to grow logistically in all the practical areas that I was responsible for as like an undergardener in my life? You found that very helpful for, your own walk with the Lord, with all of the things that, all the different dynamics that you had in your life. You were saying this, yes, let's rethink this approach because these are the things that aren't working out there when it comes to time management and habits and rhythms and all these things. Because the assumption for most time management content is that if you just worked harder, you could control everything. Or there's also the other movements that say, forget it, stop trying to be intentional at all, just kind of go with the flow and don't worry about being intentional and it's all going to work out. Those were like competing views. And neither one of them were right. And that's where our conversations at the Evergreen Planning Method came out of. The Evergreen Planner and Rooted Goals came out of conversations that we were having about, okay, let's rethink all of this and say, God is the Master Gardener. Yes, there are different seasons of life. And we are still have radical personal responsibility in all of it. And I just love that the Lord used all of that in our life and even cycles of wildfire throughout our life to put us in a place where we could build a system that was very realistic for all these different seasons. And then he, with this past wildfire, put us in a place where we were like, okay, now we have language to talk about these harder things like the wildfire seasons and how we recover from them, even the practical things.
We're honestly so excited to be back here on this podcast. We have a lot of fun plans and exciting shifts in our content that we're really can't wait to share with you guys. We do have the second part to our self-care episode coming soon, and that one really is a good one. We both really enjoyed recording that. A lot has changed since then, but we really wanted to still give you guys the second part to that.
Because planning is still the most underrated form of self-care, and we've been using that in our own life.
We basically laid the entire business on the altar and weren't actually sure, if there was a future for this business. And thankfully, we're so excited because the Lord just flung open the doors and told us, no, keep walking. This is where you're supposed to be. Both of us actually at different times came to this conclusion. And then we met together and had a conversation, and we were just so thrilled to recognize that the Lord brought us to the same place and that we were able to keep, running this race with you guys. We're having so much fun. We really do adore this business. We adore being able to create this kind of content and everything that Evergreen Planner stands for. So we are hopefully going to do some really lived in podcasts from here on out, less scripted, just kind of here talking about motherhood, talking about planning as a homeschool mama or even a working homeschool mama, because that's what we are. We want to lean a little bit more into that homeschool aspect. So much of our time throughout the week is being poured into our kiddos and their education.
Say that most of my goals at this point center around homeschooling. And then, of course, there's always that evergreen goal on my quarterly goals. It's like, what's next for the business? But otherwise, it's like, what's going on in the children's lives, what's the next right step for them is pretty much consuming my attention in this season.
Yes, and my time blocker, I chuckle because of the large line for the homeschooling. This is growing every day, it seems, because, my kiddos are only getting older and more of them are getting ready and excited to tackle their education. So we're going to be bringing a lot more homeschool content to you guys, and we like to mix in business logistics, like how we handle the business with homeschooling as mamas who work from home, just because there isn't much content about that kind of thing out there. So we're really excited to be able to keep showing up here on Make Space to Thrive. I know we had mentioned in the past that we were going to try to air episodes weekly, and we are still rebuilding here in the back end of Evergreen. So we don't know that we will actually be able to hit that benchmark, but it is a goal for us.
We also have in the last couple of months put together a crash course on using the Evergreen Planning Method as homeschooling mamas, because we have been asked so many times to produce more content about how we plan specifically as homeschooling mamas. It will give you a understanding of just a brief thumbnail sketch of here's how the Evergreen Planning Method can work. It uses the free planner printable, so you can download the day planner and start planning each day using that crash course and the tutorials in that to begin bringing order out of chaos in your life in whatever season that you're in as a homeschooling mama. And of course, the invitation is there if it's working for you to join us in the Renew course, because the Renew course is a 6-week course that takes you from taking stock and being like, okay, what's going on in my life? What season am I in? How can I begin to get organized in this season? And it takes you from that place, just 6 weeks. You will be able to organize every area of your schedule around what your priorities are in this season, but it also helps you to uncover and understand what are my priorities in this season, helps you to figure out your productivity personality and to be able to craft a unique approach to planning and time management that works for your personality, for the season that you're in and for your priorities. This is not a copy and paste, you just do it the way that we do it kind of situation here. In just 6 weeks, you can actually come up with a custom approach that works for you and takes into account the context of your life and helps you to get organized in your week rhythms and daily planning rhythms, everything. Our students really, really love it. When they walk through it, the transformation is massive in their life. Then you understand how the entire Evergreen Planning Method works, and you can use it going on in the future anytime, whatever season you're in. Just like we have just walked through this wildfire season, the Evergreen Planning Method is there to help us be able to jump right in the season that we're in and be like, okay, here's what we're going to do to get organized again with all of the resources that we have, all of the dynamics that we have. And that's what the Evergreen Planning Method does once you have it inside of you. And that's what the Renew e-course helps you to do. So just click the link in the show notes and you will be able to get that crash course that we designed for homeschooling mamas, helping you to get a taste of the Evergreen Planning Method so that you can start using our free printable to plan your day and begin getting organized around the good things that God has given you to steward.